Thank you for tuning in once again to Gods, Demons, and Magic. This is your host, Sri Sachinandan Das. We're continuing our exploration of the Egyptian mysteries, where the Egyptian priest Abaman is explaining the process of summoning the gods to the Greek philosopher Porphyry. One of the many questions asked by Porphyry was, how do the gods hear prayers? And Abaman answers this in a very interesting way. First of all, he says that they don't hear prayers through their body. Just like we must hear sounds through our ears, so the gods don't hear through their ears. Rather, their body is simply a manifestation of, you might say, like the field of power or the field of energy of that god. They can expand it and contract it as they like. They're not bound within it. Rather, the body is within them instead of them being within the body. And the body doesn't obey the laws of nature in the same way that ours does, because the gods are controllers of nature. So for the gods, their bodies are more or less tools that they manifest in various ways. They can even change their forms at various times, and so they're not bound to experience reality through the senses. So when we offer prayers to the gods, it's not necessarily that they're just hearing the sound, from a great distance away through their ear or something like that, but rather it's a process of tuning into their level of reality through our prayer. When we pray to a god, essentially what we're doing is broadcasting on their frequency. It's just like if you tune into a radio station, say you're driving in your car, you tune into 98.9 FM or something like that, and you're essentially listening to a certain frequency that's out there, a certain level of sound wave. And so the gods, you might say, each of them has their frequency. They each have their station. And, just like with the CB radio, you can broadcast out on 98.9 if you want. It'll probably get drowned out by the frequency coming from the radio tower, but you can still broadcast out on that frequency. So similarly, when you speak a prayer to a particular god, you're essentially saying something on their frequency and they can hear you, When you address it to them and you use their name and things like that, they can hear you. Although when you're speaking, it may sound like a very distant call. Your voice is very small in their frequency. Now, one of the purposes of ritual is that by using certain established rituals and certain established prayers, what you're doing is amplifying your voice. So even though you're tuning to their frequency and you're speaking through, your own radio on that frequency, if you use a certain ritual which is well established and accepted by that god, then your voice is magnified. It's like you're coming in loud and clear. It's like when you're driving, down the freeway or something. Some radio stations are choppy and broken and you can barely hear what's being said. And then other ones, it's like, they're broadcasting from a powerful radio tower right near you, and you can hear all the songs and everything like that. There's no interference because the signal is so strong. So when you use rituals, you're making your signal very strong and you're speaking on the frequency of that god. Now, another interesting thing he says about how this works is that the prayer themselves are the god. That's that's a pretty mind-blowing conception. But the gods themselves, they're non-different from their prayers, right? And they're non-different from those rituals which then cause you to, speak loud and clear, right? Those powerful rituals. So they're non-different from these things. And what does that mean? Well, it means their consciousness spreads into these prayers. Just like, for example, we have our body, and in a certain way, we're not different from the body. Our consciousness spreads throughout the body. Although as souls, we may be different, but our consciousness spreads to the different, limbs of the body. So you can feel anything that's touching your fingers. You touch your finger on something, you feel it. You're conscious of it. So for the gods, their consciousness spreads even into the prayers that are made to them. And so they can experience that prayer. They become aware of it. And that prayer is essentially their frequency, like they manifest their consciousness all throughout the universe on that frequency. And when you tune in there and you start making sounds, then they're immediately conscious of it. And, another way you could say, like, imagine, our consciousness spreads to our hand. And so imagine you're walking along and, a child comes and grabs your finger and starts tugging on your finger. And you become aware of it immediately. So that's kind of how the gods experience prayers. And of course, if you do it through a ritual, then it's like somebody, like coming directly in front of you and grabbing your hand and shaking it and looking at you, So that's what these rituals are for. They're ways of tuning yourself into their frequency, and they're aware when you do it. But also to tune into these frequencies and to sort of speak to the gods, you have to have the right consciousness. Abaman mentions that these prayers must be offered with humility. There's a certain process of associating with the gods. You're not their equal. You're a human being and you're in a much lower stage of existence. And so for the gods, if to approach them in a way which is proper, you have to be in a submissive mood. And there has to be supplication. And therefore, similar to previously we're talking about, asking them to put aside their anger or to no longer deny you their association. So in the same way, you're supplicating, you're begging, please, I am your servant, I am your inferior, I'm very much below you. And one has to approach with that particular consciousness or that mood, and then they will accept you into their association. They're pleased with that humility. They feel like, wow, this person is very humble and gentle. Even though they're just a small human being, they're a good human being. Like they're a human being who has high consciousness. They're a human being who understands themselves in relationship to the universe. This is like the famous story when Socrates had asked, or rather someone else I think had asked, who the oracle at Delphi, who the wisest man in the world was. And and the oracle replied that it's Socrates. And when they asked Socrates, how is he the wisest man? He said, because I alone know how much of a fool I am. I know that I know nothing. Right? And so this is actually exalted consciousness for a human being, is to understand exactly how small you are and how insignificant you are within reality and how little you actually know. That's actually wisdom. That's wisdom for us. And so when we approach the gods, if you want to associate with the gods, they're very high-class people. They're very high-level people. It's like if you associate with a celebrity or something like that, you want to get into a party in Hollywood and associate with rock stars and movie stars, then you have to have some qualification, to get on the list, right? Like they don't just let any guy in the street off the list. Like you have to have some wealth or some power, some position, some reason that they want to welcome you into their circle as a friend and essentially interact and engage with you. And so for a human being, what the gods are interested in is having high level of consciousness and knowledge. And for us, that means being humble. That's humility is actually an exhibition of knowledge. Like sometimes we think that knowledge means that you are, you're a great scholar and everyone bows down before you and you know more than anyone else and you can defeat anyone in argument. But actually, the real way to see whether or not someone has knowledge is how humble they are. How gentle they are, how kind they are to others, how much they put the concerns of others before them. Do they like to see others glorified instead of themselves? Do they like to glorify others and see others get the position of prestige and attention while they themselves simply want to be a humble servant of everyone else? And along with that goes tolerance. They're very, very tolerant and forgiving to all others. So obviously these are very difficult qualifications to achieve, right? The gods aren't interested in whether you have lots and lots of money or how famous you are or, how great you are, or even how educated you are, or how intelligent you are. They're not interested in any of that. That's not really a high level of achievement for a human being. A high level of achievement is how humble you are, how forgiving you are, how tolerant you are of others, how gentle and kind you are. And if you have these qualities, then the gods want to hang out with you. They think, wow, this is a very high level human. Welcome to the party. And so, and therefore the way that you show that, and they understand your sincerity, is when you approach them if you have this mood of humility. And so the more that one exhibits these particular qualities before the gods, the closer that one becomes to them. And the whole purpose of this is that then you're purified by that association. You hang out in the party of the gods. Like if you go to a celebrity party or something, like you might get a business card or some phone numbers or whatever, make a new friend or, whatever it may be that you achieve there. But with the gods, when you hang out at their party, you become purified. Your consciousness becomes elevated, and by their association, you become like them. So this is kind of like a spiritual law within the universe that you'll find in many different religions, that you become like whoever you associate with. Whoever your friends are, that's who you become. I think there's a saying like that. Like, if you want to know somebody, look at their friends, right? Or, for example, if you may remember, like when you're in high school, like I remember, there was kids that they would be rappers or something like that, and then they would start hanging out with punk rockers. And just within a week or 2 weeks, you see that, they put away their rap clothing and they start wearing punk rock clothing and they start looking like punk rockers. Or you have punk rockers that become rappers, but it really depends on who you hang out with at school, right? Because by their association, it changes your consciousness. You become like your friends. And the way it works is essentially that who you hang out with and who you associate with, that determines what you'll desire. Like, we're like sponges, and we absorb the desires of those around us. We absorb like the interests, like whatever they're into, what kind of movies they like, what kind of shows they like, what kind of music they listen to. If you hang out with people, we absorb those interests. We desire the same things they do. We become interested in those desires. It's kind of like, wow, like, for example, if you go to like an ice cream store, 31 flavors, Baskin Robbins or something, isn't it like you may experience that you're standing in line, and you get Rocky Road or whatever, because that's your favorite, but then your friend gets pralines and cream or whatever, some new flavor, right? That all of a sudden you're thinking, I want to try that, like, what is that? Give me a taste, right? That's why they have those taster cups, So it's kind of like you become interested in whatever your friends are interested, and this is how we pursue our various interests within the world. We associate with different people in different situations, and we develop different desires, and we want to taste different aspects of the world. And that's true also of political perspectives and all sorts of things. And so when you desire something and you're interested in tasting it, and you develop a strong attraction to it, then you start to think about it. And when you think about something over time, gradually you start to move towards it. You make advancement towards that thing. Like, whatever we meditate on or absorb our mind in the most, we gradually become that thing, or we attain that thing. And so that's essentially what meditation is. You're putting with one pointed attention your mind upon a particular object, and in that way you move towards that object. That object could be something transcendental, such as God, for example. You gradually, this is a great secret of religion, is that by association, you develop your desires. If you associate with godly people, you'll start to desire God. And then the more and more you desire God, then the more you'll think of God. And the more that you think of God, then the closer you become to God. And gradually, by focusing your mind upon God, you attain God. And that's what meditation is. It's the focusing of the mind. So meditation is based on thought, and thought is based on desire, and desire is based on association. So in this religion of the Egyptian priest Abamen, what you're doing is, by calling down the gods and having the requisite humility and compassion and sort of like all the best qualities possible for a human being, and exhibiting that before the gods, and begging, again, to not be ostracized, but to be welcomed into their association, then gradually you associate with the gods. And perhaps when you call them down, then that experience becomes more and more intense. It's just like, for example, if you say, imagine in ancient times, if you're a servant of someone, a spiritual teacher or something like that, and then gradually over time, by serving them, they welcome you closer and closer into their life. You begin to know them on a personal level, and then you move from servant to friend. You may always be in that humble attitude towards your spiritual teacher, but they may embrace you in a very affectionate and kind way, sort of welcome you into their life and who they are. So in the same way, by calling down the gods and having this proper attitude, gradually they welcome you into their association, and your experience of them when they come is deeper and deeper and deeper and more personal. And then by that touching of the gods into your life, then gradually you start to desire in the way they desire, right? You develop their qualities and you develop their interests. And the gods are interested in the absolute truth. They're interested in the supreme God, or they're interested in the transcendental platform. They're interested in that very origin of all their light and power. And so by associating with them, your spiritual desires become stronger and stronger and stronger. And then you're able to focus your mind onto the absolute truth, onto spiritual perfection. And your mind becomes more, as you become purified by their association, your mind becomes more and more in a fixed way, in a one-pointed attention on the absolute truth. And because of that, then you attain spiritual perfection, which is really the goal of the association with the gods. So thank you very much for listening. If you found value in this, please like and subscribe. If you're listening on iTunes, please visit srisachinandan.com/iTunes and leave a positive review. Thank you again, and we hope that you'll join us next time on Gods, Demons, and Magic.